Okay, we have both assistant state attorneys present, all for defense counsel, and Mr. Rodgers. State's ready.
Yes.
Defense. Ready?
Yes.
Who's your next witness?
Michael Lacomb.
And any issues with him before we bring him out?
He is going to talk about this spreadsheet also.
Yeah, we're going to have the spreadsheet issue, but I don't think until he testifies.
Well, he'll have to testify about it. Testify about it and how he compiled it and what's on it, and then when the state tries to move it in, we'll see where we're at. Okay. How long do you think it'll be? You're direct?
25 minutes,
Okay.
if that much.
Bring him out. Please be seated. I'll ask our jurors again, did you follow my instructions, not talk about the case among yourselves with anybody else or look up any of the people or places involved? Even if you did so inadvertently, now would be the time to raise your hand and let me know. For the record, no jurors lifted their hand. Next witness.
State calls Michael Lacomb.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Can you please state your full name for the record?
Michael Lacomb.
And can you spell your last name, please?
Lacombe.
Where are you currently employed?
With the Lee County Sheriff's Office.
And in what capacity are you employed there?
I'm a digital forensic specialist.
And as a digital forensic specialist, what are your duties?
I examine computers, cell phones, GPS, cameras, anything that may contain digital data.
How long have you been a digital forensic specialist?
Since 2012.
And did you have to complete any kind of specialized training in order to become a digital forensic specialist?
I did, yes.
What kind of training did you complete?
I took a 2-week course on learning digital forensics and then had to take a certification that took about 6 months from start to finish.
And what, if any, education did you complete prior to becoming school education? Did you complete prior to becoming a digital forensic specialist?
1 year of college.
And what was your major?
I hadn't declared a major at that point.
And as a digital forensic specialist, do you use any special, what type of equipment or instruments do you use to conduct forensic examinations of digital devices?
Typically, we would use what's called a Celebrite device. It's actually, that's the company. The device is called the UFED. And we use different various software packages to look at the extractions that we receive from those devices.
Do you receive any training on how to use, for example, Celebrite?
Yes, I'm actually certified in Celebrite as well.
We heard some testimony earlier about a program called NCASE. Do you use that?
I do, yes.
And did you receive any training in how to use NCASE?
I did. I took 2 week-long courses on that.
What's X-Ways?
That is a program very similar to NCASE. It's used to examine extractions that we get from digital devices.
Okay. How many times have you had an opportunity to conduct a forensic examination of a device?
Approximately 1,400 different devices.
And that's over the, I think you said you've been doing this since 2012?
Yes, approximately 7 years.
Is every device the same?
No.
I think we heard earlier that sometimes devices have different operating systems.
That's correct.
And do the diversity of operating systems in specific digital devices affect how you're able, if you're able to recover data, and how you recover the data?
Yes, that's one of the factors that do affect what we are able to get and not recover.
You mentioned also that you've done digital forensics examinations on GPS devices,
Correct.
global positioning system devices.
That's correct.
Okay. How many times have you done that?
Approximately 5 to 10.
They're not high on the list of the number of devices that you have an opportunity to analyze?
No, they're not.
What types of devices are you most commonly analyzing?
Typically cell phones.
Let me turn your attention back to June, July, and August of 2015. Did you become involved with an investigation into the death of Teresa Sievers?
I did, yes.
Now, you said earlier that you were a digital forensics examiner. Are you a civilian or are you a member of law enforcement?
I'm a civilian.
And so you don't actually have any police powers.
I do not.
You provide support to the detectives and sworn deputies at the sheriff's office.
Yes, that's correct.
And I understand that there was a Garmin Nuvi GPS device that you and Mr. DeShazo were working on recovering data from.
That's
or
correct.
Analyzing data.
That's correct, yes.
And did Mr. DeShazo provide you a copy of that data from the Garmin?
He did, yes.
And the two of you work on the data file together?
Yes, in different capacities, but also overlapping a little bit.
And what was the purpose of working through this data file from the Garmin?
When DeShazo originally started looking at the device, he found some data, but not what he expected. So he asked for a second set of eyes to see if there was something he was overlooking or just to look as well. So he had asked me to take a look at it.
And did you use one of these software programs to take a look at it?
I did. I used NCase, loaded up the image, and started looking at data that had been deleted from the device.
And when you say loaded up the image, what's that mean?
When we have a device, we create what's called an image. It extracts data from the device. Every byte of data, which is every little, for lack of a better word, character and piece of information from that device.
And so you used, you had that device that DeShazo, you had the image from the device that DeShazo and you were working on.
That's correct.
And then the NCase program somehow is able to connect with that image file?
Yes, I'm able to load that in there and look at all the files and deleted data that are on that device using the NCase program.
And so when you started using NCase to dig around in that image file from the Garmin, were you able to recover any data?
I was, yes.
And did you start kind of jotting down or keeping a record of the data that you were getting from within the Garmin device?
Yes, I did.
Let me show you what's been previously identified as Stacy exhibit number 106. Questions? Do you recognize number 106?
I do.
What is it?
This is a timeline that I helped create with DeShazo of information that was recovered from the GPS, whether it was deleted information or information from files that were live.
Now, what's the difference between, you use two terms there, what's the difference between live files and deleted files?
Live files are files that are either used by the user of a system or the system itself. They're not deleted. typically the files that you would see on your computer when you log into it. Deleted, or in the case, the term that's used on this time log is unallocated. They are files that have been deleted but are still accessible to a forensic program.
Okay. And you used EnCase to analyze the live files and deleted files within the Garmin image.
Yes, that's correct.
The live data is the data that the user of the Garmin unit can actually access.
Some of it the user can access, and others only the device itself can access, such as files needed to boot the system up and show you on the screen what it needs to show you.
Did the image contain what are known as unallocated files or unallocated area?
Correct. It's unallocated space.
What does that mean?
It's space that's not allocated to files that are live and in use by the system or the user. So I would liken it to basically like a bin of paper. If you look at the drive like a bin of paper, there would be a table of contents in front of the bin, and then every file that's created would have a piece of paper with data written on it. That would be logged on the table of contents. As a file is deleted, the paper's not taken out of the bin. It's still there, but it's removed from the table of contents. So it marks that piece of paper as being able to be overwritten later on.
So the unallocated space is where the Garmin unit can place additional data if it wants.
Correct. It's the papers that still had data on it but are not in essentially that table of contents.
With the live data portion of the Garmin may not necessarily replace that data with new data.
That's correct.
As you continue to dig around inside of the image file for the Garmin unit, did you then recover location information from within the Garmin?
I did, yes.
Now, we heard earlier that Mr. DeShazo had also been recovering search data and other information. Were you able to find information in the Garmin that he was unable to find?
Yes, I was.
And how were you able to do that?
I had looked through these unallocated, the unallocated space, and was looking for deleted trip logs or deleted databases, searches, different things like that.
Mr. DeShazo was looking in the live data area of the Garmin.
That's correct.
Garmin file.
That's correct, yes.
And as you found deleted trip data and other information, did you also jot that down on the spreadsheet at Exhibit 106?
Yes, I did.
And the two of you were entering information onto the same spreadsheet?
Yes, correct.
Well, if the trip logs were deleted, how was it that you were able to dig around inside the image file and find it?
I was able to use EnCase to do searches. When I looked at a live trip file, I could find out how that file is structured. So there are certain things called headers in files that designate what type of file it is. It wouldn't be something that could be seen by a typical end user. You'd have to use a forensic program to see it. Once I found that, then I could do searches through that unallocated space for similar areas that had that data in it that would point to deleted trip logs.
And so like you told us earlier, these deleted trip logs were in the unallocated section of the image file?
Correct.
And so those trip logs were in an area of the Garmin where they could potentially be overwritten.
That's correct.
They just hadn't yet been overwritten.
Correct. Some of them were in full. There were other trip logs that were partially overwritten.
And those trip logs, the ones that you were locating that were deleted and in the unallocated area of the Garmin, did you record that information as well in your spreadsheet?
I did, yes.
Now, your spreadsheet also contains times and dates of specific locations. How did you get the time and date from the image file from within the Garmin?
So there was another type of file I was able to find. It was a deleted file called the GTM data. It shows a last connected with an actual date and time. What happens is there's a traffic cable that's connected to the device, and it has a mini receiver in it that contacts satellites to tell you how the traffic is. Every time there's power to the device, it logs and says, I'm connecting to the satellites at this date and time. So the way that this device worked is when files were deleted and recreated, it would start at the beginning of the disk, and as it deleted a file, it would recreate in unallocated space next to it. So putting those two together, I was able to find dates and times of when the device was turned on, and then a trip log that was created shortly after. Those trip logs don't have dates and times that are associated with them themselves. So I had to use the two together to make a best estimate of when that trip was created.
And you did that by just comparing the data in the live side of the image file with the data in the unallocated area?
No, these were all done with, well, there were some dates and times of data in the live files, but mainly what I did was dates and times of the last connected dates of the traffic and then the creation of the trip logs.
And that information was contained, the date and time information was contained within the Garmin itself?
Correct.
You didn't have to consult an outside source to interpret the date and time from within the Garmin?
No, that was written in plain text.
Now, at some point, did you and Mr. DeShazo reach out to Garmin USA about this Garmin unit?
We did, yes.
Why was it that you reached out to Garmin USA?
So when I had first found some of these trip logs and last connected information, wanted to run that information past them to see if they could add any extra guidance. In that particular case, they weren't able to give us any direction. However, they did suggest that some of their devices will contact their servers. So they asked for the serial number off the device to just see if that device had ever contacted their servers.
And did you provide them with the unit ID number from the device?
We did, yes.
And did they send you some files back from Garmin
They did.
related to that unit number?
They did, yes.
And did you and Mr. DeShazo have an opportunity to review the files that were sent back to you from Garmin?
Yes, we looked through them briefly.
Was there in fact a connection from that Garmin device to the Garmin USA server?
There was, yes.
And was there an email address associated with that connection?
Yes, there was.
What was the email address?
If I can,
This has come into evidence, but I'm objecting to preserve this based on my previous objections.
Noted for the record, overruled.
What was the email address?
if I can refer to my notes.
Do you remember?
I remember
it right now?
I remember the first portion. There's a number at the end of the email address that I don't recall.
And would it help if you refreshed from your notes?
It would, yes.
May he refresh from his notes?
Can refresh his memory.
The email address that was in the Garmin data was Jimmy Ray Rodgers 90@gmail.com.
Your Honor, at this time, I would move into evidence self-authenticating documents from Google marked as States Exhibit. States Exhibit number 99.
We'll note your previous objection for the record, overruled. We'll show it admitted.
email address, JimmyRayRogers90@gmail.com, was within the Garmin data.
Correct, yes.
Just a moment, please. And did you and Mr. DeShazo eventually complete your spreadsheet that you were teaming up, working on putting the entries in from the Garmin unit?
Yes, we did.
And did you provide that spreadsheet to an analyst at the sheriff's office?
I did not. I provided it to the detective that was on the case.
And did you later become aware that an analyst had your spreadsheet?
I did, yes.
And is State's Exhibit number 106 the true and accurate well, first of all, I don't know if I asked you what State's Exhibit number 106 is.
It is the GPS timeline that we created.
And is that a true and accurate representation of it?
It is, yes.
And it contains the entries that you and Mr. DeShazo teamed up on putting onto the spreadsheet?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, I would admit what's been previously marked as State's Exhibit number 106 and the evidence of State's 106.
Objection on the grounds previously argued.
Noted for the record, we'll show it admitted. Overruled.
And did you bring with you today a disk containing the Garmin GPS data and timeline that you've been testifying about
Yes.
today?
Yes.
And this is a copy of the file that you and Mr. DeShazo were working on?
That's correct.
And that's what's actually on this disk you brought with you today?
Yes, it is.
Did you create the disk for us?
Mr. DeShazo did create it.
Did you review the data?
I did, yes.
And it's the actual data that you and Mr. DeShazo were working on?
It is, yes.
All right, at this time, Your Honor, we would admit what's been previously marked as State's Exhibit number 108 in evidence of State's 108.
We'll show it admitted.
Your Honor, we tender the witness.
Defense. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Sorry. You testified that you used NCASE as the program you were using when working this with this particular data.
That's correct.
And using NCASE, you weren't able to generate any reports or anything like that with this data directly with the program, were you?
I did not in this case.
Does NCASE normally, or can it sometimes generate reports?
It can, yes.
Same as Celebrite?
Similar, but yes.
And so based on that, you had to do a manual search. By a manual search, do you mean you're actually moving around the data and looking at it on the computer screen?
There was a little bit of that, and there was also, we can do what's called keyword searches. So I can put strings of numbers, characters to search for throughout that whole drive.
This is on the computer screen.
That's correct.
And you found what you were looking for in something which you'd refer to as unallocated space.
That's correct.
And unallocated space is where things which are deleted go, correct?
Yes.
That could be information that's deleted either by the user or just by the machine itself, correct?
Absolutely, yes.
Now, at the time that you were doing this search, did you create any screenshots to preserve what you were doing?
Originally, I did not.
Did you eventually do screenshots?
I did, yes.
When did you do screenshots?
Within the past week and a half as I was going back and reviewing the data.
And did you create a report based on what you'd done in this case?
Yes.
When did you create the report?
Over the past week and a half, and I had just finalized it yesterday.
And approximately when was it that you did these searches where you found what you were looking for?
The initial time?
Yes.
Approximately July to September of 2015.
Now, looking at that timeline you've created, some of the events didn't give specific times, correct?
Correct.
Does that mean they just weren't tied to a timestamp?
I would have to look at the timeline for any specifics, but yes, any of the trips were not tied to a timestamp. Go ahead.
And based on those particular ones, I'm sorry, did I interrupt you?
No,
On those particular ones, you give a time range, correct?
correct.
And is that based on the previous timestamp, then you have this event, then the next timestamp?
That's correct.
So you don't know exactly, it was just somewhere during that time frame.
Right. I could make an assumption based on the typical usage of the device, but I was not able to tell by looking at the data.
Did you use those assumptions in generating that spreadsheet?
I tried not to use any assumptions. That's why you would see between this date and time.
Okay. Did you have the same problem with some of the locations that the machine recorded?
No.
Okay. So in looking at the spreadsheet, sometimes you say in the vicinity of. Can you say why you said the vicinity of and not at that location?
I can't testify to the actual range of the device, so it was within a few feet of that location.
Would the time also affect that?
I'm not sure I
You don't
understand
know.
the question.
You might not know the specific time that was created on some of them.
That's correct.
You also have indicated likely Eastern. Is that because the machine didn't indicate what time?
That was an assumption, only because when we originally created the timeline, it was used more of a guideline to give the detectives something to look for. The device was in this area of, say, Tennessee. You might want to look for video or whatever they happen to be looking for. So when I had created that line, it was likely Eastern because it was created likely in the Eastern time zone. But I couldn't tell until we had put everything together.
So you're kind of guessing there?
That's correct.
There's some that you have likely performed some. I mean, can you explain this entry to me? Search for Fort Myers was likely performed somewhere in the vicinity of the northern parking lot at Lakes Park. So you've got both likely performed and somewhere in the vicinity.
Objection, Your Honor. May the witness have the exhibit back and counsel refer him to the appropriate line on the exhibit?
I don't have any problem
So we
doing
can
that.
answer the question.
You have no objection?
I don't have a problem doing that.
You all.
Are we looking at the top line on the second page?
I'm looking particularly at line 42. I don't know what page it is on that. I might be looking at a different.
I see on my copy, line 43, search for Fort Myers was likely performed somewhere.
Okay. That's the one I'm talking about. Search likely performed. It says search for Fort Myers was likely performed somewhere in the vicinity of the northern parking lot at Lakes Park. Then you have GPS numbers. Search was performed on 6/28/15 between 12:04 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and 6:54 Eastern Standard Time, presumably closer to 6:54.
Correct. Okay.
So the likely is still dealing with the reliability or range of the machine.
Right. So the reason it would be likely performed in that location, we did our best analysis. We had a test device. The way that a search, there was a search performed on this device for Fort Myers. When you did the search for Fort Myers, it would come up with a list of possible hits. It might say Fort Myers Beach, Fort Myers Ale House, and so on and so forth.
Okay.
What it does is the very first hit that it comes up with is the closest to where you're at, and the second hit would be a little further away, third would be a little further away. So we had put all of the first 10 locations on a map, and then drew lines to where each of the hits met those criteria.
So that particular, that might not be where it was just what it was closest to?
That's
the
what.
establishment or known location that it was closest to?
Right. It was honestly, it was a best guesswork in that case. Again, using it as a guideline to try to help the detectives figure out maybe something that might help them.
Judge, that's all the questions I have for this witness.
State,
Nothing further.
is this witness to be released or retained?
Ms. Friedel?
No objection. free to go. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry.
Next witness.
They called Myra Simmons.
Sure. It's one of those days we're going to stop a little bit early again. I'm going to ask you not to talk about the case among yourselves with anybody else or look up any people or places involved. And why don't we have you come back at 9 o'clock again tomorrow? Please be seated. Anything else before we come back tomorrow?
Can we address the sequestration issue, Judge? I don't think it should take more than 5 minutes.
Sure, we can do that.
And Judge, the Stacy exhibit number 70 was identified but not admitted. I'd like to just ask the court to make it a part of the record. It's not admitted, but I want to preserve the
We'll
record.
make it an exhibit.
Thank you.
What was that number, please?
Stacy
70.
exhibit number 70, the Walmart receipt.
Judge, can I approach?
Sure.
I'm just going to give you, it's the statute on the rule of sequestration of witnesses and a case. I'll keep my argument extremely brief. What the statute says is that at the request of a party, the court shall order upon a firm motion, the court may order witnesses excluded from the proceeding so that they cannot hear the testimony of other witnesses except as provided in subsection 2. The relevant portion of subsection 2, which I'm referring to as 2C, which is a person whose presence is shown by the party's attorney to be essential to the presentation of the party's cause. In this particular case, both these witnesses are going to testify as to cell phone data that they use programs to come up with exhibits for. Mr. Sawicki is a forensic expert. He has been deposed in this particular case. I would just like him to be able to hear their testimony so that in the event he testifies, he will know what they've testified to, because that would be what he's talking about. And also to assist me with my cross if necessary. I believe that does show that he is essential for me. However, the case that I have provided, Judge, just basically says it's your discretion.
State.
Your Honor, I hear Mr. Darrow making a two-part argument. One, that it is necessary for him to help him in preparation of his case, and that would be an appropriate request to make for someone to assist and be in the courtroom. As to hearing to then comment on the testimony of the witnesses, unless as an expert he needs to hear the testimony of the witness in order to form his opinion, I do not think that's an adequate reason to lift the rule on sequestration and permit this witness to testify. And there's actually some case law on it, and I don't have it with me. But certainly if he needs the witness to assist him in his preparation of the case, that is within the court's discretion.
Do you object?
I suppose I will save my objection at such time as Mr. Sawicki should start to comment on the witness's testimony during his versus testifying to his opinions and information that he has. I would at that time, though, object because
Well, you don't object to him sitting here and watching their testimony is what I'm getting at.
I'm not going to object to him watching the testimony.
Okay. Fair enough. Nice and easy.
And it'll most likely be electronically, Judge. This is all available electronically.
Okay. Anything else from the state? From the defense?
The only thing, we'd like to get an idea of timeline in terms of our witnesses.
State said yesterday roughly 25 more. I think we've gone through about 9 or 10 today.
6.
6? God, seems like more.
It just seems like that.
You know what? I'm including the people from yesterday who weren't recalled with the discs.
We'd like to make some
Graham and
arrangements,
Bland.
Monday, if they were on call by Monday, if that's sufficient.
State, you think you're going to wrap it up by Friday, or?
I think so, Your Honor.
Okay.
We're going to try to make a run to be done by Friday.
At the end of the day Friday or midday?
To be done by midday Friday. Again, I'm not making promises.
Well, I'm asking because
Yes,
That's really short
we want to make a run to be, we can't anticipate any unanticipated delays, but we want to try to be there by midday Friday if we can.
I would suggest, Judge, and I know I don't want to waste half a day, but once they finish their case, we still don't know it. We won't know everything they're going to put on as far as how we're going to present our case. We're going to need a little time. We're going to need a little time to talk to Mr. Rodgers. So I think even if we finish early on Friday, that might be appropriate for us to have that time rather than us rolling right into presenting our case.
roughly how many days is your case going to be? Two?
Not long.
Well, you only have about two, then a half a day might be, that should be all right.
I think they're still ahead of schedule.
Okay. Anything else? Can I both sides approach for a minute? I told the jurors 9 o'clock. Do you guys want to get here a little bit early just to make sure you have your audio set up for your person?
Yeah, well, I think it's all streamed.
Okay, well, I mean,
Maybe, yeah, okay.
you just want
9 o'clock for the
to...
jury.
Is he streaming it from the courthouse or from a particular website, or
I'll talk to him and figure that out.
you just want to make sure it's really streaming if that's how he's going to do it? So maybe
Maybe they'll do it by phone.
I won't take the bench till 9, but we'll have everybody here at 8:30 just to make sure you're. How about that?
That's good.
Can we discuss that? Because if the streaming is a deal breaker for the expert, I have it on very good authority that sometimes audio isn't always available.
That's why I'm saying
What I
maybe.
think we'll do is call him or call it on my, I don't want to hate the risk of putting it on speaker. Let me talk with him, I'll figure it out later.
I just want to make sure it's really running so we don't have the jurors here at 9 and then we're starting at 11. So
No, I'll talk to him tonight, we'll be ready to go at 9 whether I can.
we'll have the courtroom open at 8:30, but we'll start at 9.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
See everybody then.